Welcome to the Arizona Sunset Podcast. Our goal is to seek senior solutions for aging problems. Now your host, Justin Owens.
On this week's episode, we will be talking with Jake Carlson, who is the owner of Life Plan Legal, a law firm that focuses on planning for future events, elder care, aging, and many other topics. Jake has been a practicing attorney in the state of Arizona since 2006, and he got his law degree from the California Western School of Law, and as well as an MBA from the San Diego State University. We're glad to have him with us as he is a speaker, an author, a podcaster, and an accountability partner. I'll let you explain what that entails. Nonetheless, we're grateful to have his time today. Thanks, Jake, and welcome.
Hey, thank you, Justin. It's great to be with you and to hang out with your audience a little bit and talk about these important topics.
Where is a good place to start? When someone comes in and asks you, they have a senior that they're worried about. I know at your website they start with the basics of elder care, but what is the first step when someone comes in for help?
Yeah, really when it comes to like what we call successful aging, and that's what we try to focus on. You hear these terms, elder care, you hear these terms, estate planning or trust estates and all that. Really for us, what we focus on is this idea of aging successfully. And the definition of aging successfully has changed over time. I mean, historically, it used to be just, how can I stay as healthy as possible for as long as possible? And nowadays, it's become much more proactive. Successful aging is much more of a proactive approach to really what we say, enjoying the golden years of our lives or making the golden years more golden. So when people come in and ask questions like, where do I start? It really is, they fall into one of two categories. Category number one is, I'm here to be proactive. I don't have any specific needs today, but I anticipate that I may have needs in the future. And so I want to put together a plan to make that transition as smooth as possible. On the flip side, we have people who come in and say, you know what, I have a reactionary problem here. I mean, maybe mom or dad slipped and fell, or they need special care, or we've been noticing a decline in mental ability and mental processing over time, and we need to really focus on that. And so the first place is to ascertain, hey, is this a proactive situation or a reactive situation? As with a number of things, the more proactive you can be, the better it is, right? The more you can anticipate the needs. And so we try to emphasize through our education, through our opportunities, hey, how can we as individuals proactively plan for this successful aging part of our lives?
I'm guessing that's with the individual prior to them aging, prior to them to needing to be reactionary, prior to mental and health and other related issues that come up that may prevent them from making those plans, correct?
Yeah, you bet. So, I mean, different products, different things that we do, different services that we offer have different target age groups. So if you're talking like wills and trusts, you may be emphasizing a 35 to 55-year-old. If you're talking about proactive planning for long-term care, successful aging, you may be talking about somebody 55 to 75 years old. If you're talking about reactionary planning, you're often talking about somebody that's 75 and above in those different areas. So yeah, I mean, you come into our office, you talk to us, we really have options for everybody along the spectrum, but depending on where you're at in the process.
Okay. And you mentioned a couple of rough target age groups. What is your opinion on long-term care insurance, and what is the target age that people should be looking into that?
Yeah, and so just as a point of disclosure, we don't sell any products as far as long-term insurance. We're not an insurance company. And so really it's best to talk to somebody who's educated in that regard. But I'll give you a couple of general guidelines that we look at. Right now, we have about 10,000 people a day that are turning 65. I mean, this is the time period where our baby boomer population is aging. And because of that, the entire population seems to be getting a little bit older. And so as we start to focus on things like, what am I going to need after I can't take care of myself anymore? The typical person is going to end up needing, the average person I don't know typical, but the average person is going to need about 2.5 years probably of special care within their lifetime. And the average cost of that can range depending on the facility that you go into, can be, $50,000 to $150,000. And of course it goes on up from there. So when you start asking questions about is long-term care insurance important? Well, just like a lot of insurances that we have right now, there's a cost-benefit analysis or a return on investment calculation to look at. Number one is, what assets do you have that you can use to take care of yourself as you age? If you're in a situation where you've got your house paid for, you have no debt, maybe you have a large 401k or a large IRA or some type of savings account, your need for long-term care insurance may be a little bit less than somebody who may not have those. But like all insurance products, right, you're paying a little bit now for a lot later. But you're going with the insurance company where they're saying, we think you're going to need less than you're paying for, so we're willing to sell it to you. And you're almost making the bet that you're going to need more than you're paying for. And so there's always that kind of exchange, like life insurance, right? I mean, I have a life insurance policy on my family. And, if something, heaven forbid, were to happen to me, my family would be taken care of. Now, I hope I never need that. I hope that I'm paying into that and that they're going to keep my money and that they're going to be fine. But heaven forbid something happens to me, I'm glad that I put in that little bit up front. So now specific to long-term care. Long-term care insurance is, relatively speaking, inexpensive, especially when compared to the value that you get at it. But as with a lot of insurance products, a lot depends on how soon you start making these decisions. The younger you are, the healthier you are, the more options you have. As you age or as your health starts to decline, then it gets a little bit more tricky, or in another word to say, it gets a little bit more expensive in order to avail yourself of those options.
Okay. I don't want to get too, long-term care is probably a whole episode by itself, and I didn't want to get too much into the weeds with it. But in general, is it like a life insurance policy that once you have it, your rate remains the same? So I would assume that the earlier you get it, the longer you pay into it, but your rates are going to be lower. But if you get it later in life, like say 60, 65, you're going to be paying a higher premium than if you got it at like say 55.
Yeah, and keep in mind that this is a very competitive market. So companies are often trying to adjust different factors in there in order to be more marketable. And so it really does take sitting down with somebody who can really say, these are the options, this is what it's going to cost. It's actually more like a financial services model than it is necessarily like a life insurance model in that regard.
And what age do you advise your clients to start looking into it? Like what's a good target general age?
Yeah, so there's a couple of factors that go into it, but let's say between 60 and 70, you'll want to start taking a look at it. And the reason for that is because if you think about the normal aging population, there are different time periods in life that certain things happen, right? And so a lot of us, our income is very back-loaded, but our expenses are very front-loaded. So like cost of education comes when you're in your 20s and you're not making any money, but you're trying to go to school, or you're trying to buy a house, or you're getting into a car, or then your kids start to grow up and they need different things, and then they need weddings and they need college themselves. So our expenses tend to have these mile markers on them. The reason that we say start to look at this around between 60 and 70 is because this is after you start to get past some of those bigger expenses that you're probably prioritizing in your life right now. If let's say you're below the age of 60, you may be prioritizing things like paying off your house, or maximizing your 401k, or investing in college for your kids, or whatever it may be.
Well, that kind of leads us into our next little thing. Our next little topic would be, doesn't Medicare cover that? Cover the long-term care?
120 days.
That's it.
Yeah. So Medicare is designed to be out there for our seniors, and it does have some great advantages for our seniors for up to 120 days worth of a stay. After 120 days, then Medicare no longer kicks in, and you have to start looking for other alternatives. Of course, long-term care insurance could be one, savings could be one, using some sort of Altex or Medicaid use in your life could be one. There's a lot of options, but Medicare ceases to be that long-term care option unless you're not needing full-time care or not needing like inpatient care. Medicare has its advantages almost like health insurance does.
Like for the 120 days, is that more, I don't know, like an extended stay after a rehab, or is that, would someone be able to find that type of care at least for their, say they maybe not neglected their loved one, but didn't realize how bad it was. And they all come and gather around for Christmas and they realize, hey, Dad shouldn't be driving. Dad shouldn't be living on his own. Dad's not eating right. He's not taking his meds. We need something like quick. Is that something that they were able to get through Medicare at least for the 120 days? Or is that something more specific to an acute injury?
Yeah, more specific to like an injury, a stroke, a heart attack, a fall and break a hip. I need rehab because of, an injury that I had. That's more what the Medicare is used for. Coming home for Christmas, something very common. Actually, our business really kicks up during the holidays because that's when we start to see, it's one thing to have a conversation, FaceTime, telephone with our aging parents or aging loved ones. It's another to actually spend time around them and see the different nuances of things that they forget.
And then being an attorney, this might be up your alley. Can you explain what a living will is?
Yeah. So living will can also be known by a number of different names. It could be a healthcare power of attorney. It could be a healthcare directive. Living will is basically just the instructions that you're leaving to doctors, to caregivers, to your children, to those who are surrounding you about, how you would like your medical treatment handled. One of the big things that comes up now is these HIPAA releases, right? I mean, doctors are so careful about what they can release to a non-patient. But then when we start seeing with our elderly loved ones, our seniors out there that may need a little assistance from their loved ones to say, I think this is the direction that we should go, or try this, and so on. And that HIPAA release with in conjunction with that living will is such a powerful tool to use these days.
And is that, you mentioned healthcare POA, is the same thing as a medical power of attorney? Is that all kind of the same type of document?
Yeah, different states use different terminology. And because of that, and because we're such a fluid society that's kind of going around, those terms get used interchangeably, but they really all focus on the same underlying purpose. And that is, communicating your desires, your healthcare desires, and those who have power to make those decisions for you in case of an emergency or incapacitation or inability to make them yourself.
And if someone has a request, a DNR request, I can't say that word right now, but basically a do not resuscitate instruction, is that the kind of language that would go into this document?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It would.
Then I imagine if such a document exists, if a senior is in any type of facility or getting care, all the caregivers should have a copy of it. Or even if they have in-home health, right? I think everyone, that's something that you'd want to spread. If you are that person, if you are the power of attorney, you want to make sure that everyone providing that care knows. I mean, I guess it's all in there. I'm starting to think through it like a power of attorney is someone who would act on someone's behalf in the event that they are unable to make those decisions for themselves. And a living will would basically cover some of that. Is there a typical client, I assume, would write up a living will while they're of sound mind, and this is how I want this to go down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are there events or like triggers that would engage that power of attorney, or is it something that the power of attorney would say, we've gone beyond the point where they're able to make these decisions, we're beyond the point of sound mind? How does that what causes that POA to take over?
Yeah, and actually, I think this is a much larger question than just the healthcare power of attorney or the living will. And the reason for this is because right now there's options out there for individuals to go get documents done. Like you can go to a legal Zoom, you can go to your local library, you can go down to the the courthouse and you can pick up documents and you can create documents for yourself. You don't need to go see an attorney to do this. So what then value does an attorney have? Well, there's two real values. Number one is the education. It's the helping you to understand what the different options are and to help you with a strategy moving forward. That's the second big advantage of hiring an attorney to do this or walk you through this, is they can give you the steps specific to your situation, right? A document is just a document. It's the way that it is. But then when we go to this bigger picture is when you create these documents, and a healthcare power of attorney or a living will shouldn't be necessarily created on its own as a standalone document. It should be part of an entire estate plan for you. I have a financial power of attorney. I have directions for what would happen if I was to pass away, burial instructions. It would have what to do with my assets. All of this is part of what we would call the estate plan. At our business, we call it a values-based estate plan. But the biggest challenge that we see is that, let's say mom or dad, they put together these documents and then they put them in a safe, or they put them in, they hide them under a drawer, a secret drawer in their desk or something, and then nobody knows what is available, what's out there. In fact, there's a great quote that I use often in my presentations, and that is 90% of all problems with inheritance can be solved if the parents would just talk to their children before they pass away. And so this overarching thing that I like to talk about, Justin, is this idea that whatever you create, you need to share it with your loved ones. They need to know what it is available. And so as you talk about, mom is in a facility and she, can't make decisions on her own. The loved ones, those who are looking after her, need to have access to that power of attorney, whether it's healthcare, whether it's financial, whatever it is, so that they can talk about it. And one of the things we talk about, I mentioned that we call it values-based estate planning. The reason that we call it values-based estate planning is we really identified 3 key steps that each individual should go through in creating their estate plan. And just for fun, I call it the IRS Vision Plan. Have you ever noticed, Justin, that the IRS spells theirs?
Yes, theirs.
So
that's good.
So, as a way to remember these 3 steps, we call it the IRS Vision Plan. I stands for identify. Identify what you believe, what's important to you, what you're passionate about, what your background is, what you want to pass on to the next generation. Identify, I. Then we move to the second step, and that is R, record. Record what you want to pass to the next generation. Anybody can count the beans and pass them to the next generation. But who can help you pass your values? Who can help you pass what you really want to accomplish with your plan? So that's the R, record. Identify what it is, record, IR. And then finally, the most important, the one that most families don't get to, is the S, share. Pass it to the next generation. Let them know what you're thinking, why you're thinking. Justin, when people pass away, they have this assumption, okay, let's say I have a $400,000 estate. I have 4 kids. They have this assumption that dividing up my estate equally, 25% to each of my heirs, is going to solve all the problems. Nobody can argue about, I got 100,000, I got 100,000, I got 100,000. Guess what we see? We see fights happening because somebody wants mom's wedding ring, or they want the pan that she used to cook birthday cakes in, or they want dad's wrench because they all used to go gather around the car when he was changing the oil. It's these sentimental things that cause most of the challenges within estate planning. And so that's why we start with this process of identify, record, and then share, so everybody is on the same page and there's no surprises. So I know that was a long answer to your short question about that, but the idea is, yes, everybody should be familiar with what the next steps are in the case that our loved ones need our support, and frankly, where to find those documents. Now, do they have to be filed with the doctor or the caregiver? Sure, they can. Is it necessary? No, you can bring them out at the time, but it's often, do you want them to be reactionary or proactive of what's happening with your loved one?
Thank you for sharing those steps on how to best prevent inheritance questions or arguments among the kids. It makes a lot of sense. And I think as we have people that pass away in our family, in our lives, we see that does happen more often than probably the deceased would wish for it to happen. How do you, and one thing I noticed looking through your site, you were really big on the values, right? People have money, they have assets, they have things that they give away. How do you tie a value, right? Morals, values, beliefs, or whatever this is. How do you tie that to your plan so that it's able to be passed on to the next generation? How do you help them with that?
Yeah, and I'll give you a quick story of why this is so important. So there was an attorney that I met, and in the early 80s, he was working in bankruptcy and tax kind of resolution. And one of his clients couldn't afford to pay his bankruptcy bill. And so offered him his company as like, here, you can have this company. There's not a whole lot to it, but it is a company. Why don't you take it? He ends up taking this company. And at the time he had 5 young kids, probably 5 kids under the age of 8. And he gave each of them like a 10% stake in this company when they were young. And then he took this company to $800 million. And these kids were each sitting on an inheritance, or, they owned 10% of this company. So they're sitting here saying, I've got $80 million in the bank. Now, they couldn't get their money. It was a closely held company. The only way they could get their money is if Dad sold the company. So here I enter the picture, and Dad is in his late 70s, and he is tired. And he's been working this company since the early 80s, and he just wants to retire. But he's looking at his 5 kids, and they hadn't gone to college. 3 of them had never had a job. 2 of them, the only job that they had was working as kind of like front desk support for Dad's company. And the reason that they hadn't gone to college, the reason that they hadn't worked or gotten jobs is because they were just waiting for Dad to sell his piece of the company so they could cash in on their windfall, take their $80 million. They were very heavily in debt because that's how they were living on their cars and their homes, and they had kids of their own. At this point, it had been since the early 80s, so now these kids were adults that had kids of their own. And this father was saying, look, I thought I was doing something so great for my kids, right? I worked hard. I built my estate. I wanted to provide for them. I thought I was doing a good job by giving them 10% of the company. And all I've done is not only ruin this generation, but I've ruined the next generation as well. In almost every culture, there's a saying. And it's interesting if you check cultures, but it's, wealth only survives 3 generations. Or in Ireland, they say clogs to clogs in 3 generations. Or in China, they say clogs to clogs in 3 generations. Or in Ireland, they say shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And when you really look at what that means, well, generation 1, they were wearing the long sleeve shirts while they were out working in the field, and they worked hard, right? 12, 14, 15 hours a day, so that they could send their kids into the city to get an education. Their kids went in the city, got an education, they had the wealth, and so the next generation, 3rd generation, was born without this idea of work, of hard, of effort, of all of that. And so then the cycle flips back, and they end up back in the field, with the long sleeve shirts trying to keep the sun off them. Or in China, clogs to clogs. Clogs are the shoes that they wore out in the field. And so it's this idea that you can pass money to the next generation. But what's the value of passing money to the next generation if you can't also pass what it took for you to make that money, for you to become who you are? I look at it and I say, if my father never gave me a cent, and I don't expect that he ever would give me a cent, I will have been richly, richly blessed and inherited through just the hard work, the lessons, the encouragement, the things that he has passed on to me. But most of us don't take that second to pause and say, what did I learn from that senior generation? What are the lessons that they want to pass on? And then that goes back into that cycle of identify what you truly value, record it for the next generation, and share it. And we've actually developed a whole process for how we go through each of those steps and some of the key mile markers, if you will, to know that you're accomplishing it. But that's really where this idea of anybody can pass $200,000, $300,000, $500,000, $1 million to the next generation. How do you pass on who you are, the legacy that you're creating? You might have noticed this, Justin, as you and I age in life, that we start to shift from this mental focus of how can I be successful to this mental focus of significance. And we transition from, I want to leave a mark. I want to leave something worth remembering. I don't want to just pass away and have nobody remember what I did and what I stood for. And that's where the values-based side of estate planning comes in.
I think it's an interesting way to tie to that estate because, and I'm guessing it's going to be a longer conversation on how one would convey their specific values over. And generally something, in my view, obviously I'm not an attorney, but my thoughts is something that's passed on throughout life. And I think that with your assets, hopefully that would be something to drive the exclamation mark at the end of your life, is to pass on those assets with those values. And hopefully that's something that they can remember going forward. No, I like that idea. I think that's significance, but also just leaving like the legacy. It's not so much for me, but like, the reason why, you and I as fathers do what we do is because we love our kids. We want the best for them. We want to provide them opportunities. It's not just, I don't know, like at the end of the day, I don't really care so much about what my paycheck says. It's more about what it can do for me and my family. I think that's what it comes down to for me anyway.
What are zeros, right? What are numbers in an account? It's really what you can exchange those zeros for that's super important.
Yep. Apart from we talked about long-term care insurance. What other options are available should someone find themselves in need of long-term care?
Yeah. So, the first place to look is, okay, what savings do I have? And, how far are they going to go? For most of us, we probably haven't saved enough during our lifetime to really have an extended stay at a care facility, a nursing home, or in that kind of environment. But that's one place.
Can I pause you real quick? You had mentioned earlier that when we were talking about insurance, that it's 2.5 years roughly most people can expect to need some type of special care, and it was between $50,000 up to $150,000 per year. So if we just take the middle of that, it's $100K per year. So we're looking at about $250,000 just for, on average, right? Just for the long-term care, not to include any other needs before or after that specific time period. So we're talking about a nest egg of about $250,000 roughly in general as a ballpark.
Well, and that's just specifically for the care.
Right.
Keep in mind, let's take Social Security for an example. When Social Security was created, the average individual graduated from college and went into the workforce, maybe not graduated from college, but entered the workforce, if you will, at the age of 21. And the average retirement age was 65. The average life expectancy was 68. And so that worked, right? Now we know all the problems that Social Security has, but if we just look at some of the different trends that we're noticing, number one is the average age that somebody exits or enters the workforce now is 23 or 24. So we're entering the workforce a couple years later than we had previously. On the flip side, when the average age of retirement was 65, it is now 62. So our working lifespan is now being condensed by about 5 years because we're entering later and leaving earlier. And then if you look at the average life expectancy, that if you turn 60, your life expectancy is in the 90s. Now, overall life expectancy is in the high 80s. But once you turn 60, once you've made it that far in life, your life expectancy is actually into the early 90s. And so when you look at that and you say, okay, did I, during my lifetime, under a system that was designed for me to not live into my 90s, provide for enough for me to take care of myself into my 90s? Then you take on top of that the fact that most of us are going to probably need 2.5 years of long-term care in addition to however long we're going to be living. So take, for example, I retire at 62 and I live until I'm 88 and then I go into a care facility. How am I going to pay for that? So your question was, what kind of alternate options do we have? Obviously, we take a look at what we have within our own options as far as savings, as far as planning what we've done. Obviously, long-term care insurance is an option. But then the government also has provided for, if you meet a certain economic threshold that you can qualify for Altex or Medicaid, different from Medicare, which actually will cover stay in long-term care facilities. So those are a couple of options.
Okay, and is Medicaid an income or asset-based qualification?
It is. It's really dependent on a couple of things. There's really two qualifications to qualify for Medicaid. One is you have to have a certain level of sickness, illness. You have to be in a care facility, or you have to reach a certain level of illness. The second one then is an income-based or a needs-based assessment. And so there's certain things that are exempt from it, and you'll want to talk to your attorney and make sure that you've got everything arranged properly. But certain things are exempt, like your primary residence, but other things are not exempt, like money that you have in savings. And so typically, in order to qualify for a Medicaid package, you would need to spend down your the assets that you have, the liquid assets that you have, some of your investments that you have. And that's why it's so important to not just try to navigate these kind of choppy waters on your own, but to really sit down with a professional that can say, okay, this is the best strategy for making sure that you can qualify for this. Now, sometimes we talk to individuals that say, I don't know if I really feel comfortable going down this government-assisted route, the Medicaid option route. And I look at it and I say every individual has to make a decision on their own, but keeping in mind, especially if you have a surviving spouse or a loved one that you're caring for, that they also may not be in the facility right now. They may need those assets for their life, particularly if you're both retired and you're kind of living out your sunset years. And so one thing to consider is start young. Start in your 60s and 70s and start to look into what these options are. The best option that you have when it comes to like Medicaid and government assistance for long-term care is to really start early with a proactive plan, because the Medicaid application process looks back over the last 5 years of kind of what your assets are, what they were, what you did with them, and that will play into your being approved or not being approved.
So you can't just give it all away the day before you apply and then you're good to go.
That's right. That's right. They will. You can give it all away 5 years before you go in. But if you give it 4 years and 11 months and 30 days, then you'll get denied. Although there are ways to catch up and go through what they call it a penalty period. But I don't like the word penalty. It's just more of a approval process that you have to go through to get there. And still, you could still qualify even if you waited until a month before going into a facility. We still have options. We call it more of a crisis plan, an asset protection crisis plan that we would look at of how we can, at this point, save your assets for either your loved ones, a surviving spouse, or whatever. Or if you end up getting better and need to exit the facility for any reason, what are your options at that point?
Well, that happens a lot, where it may just be a respite stay, after a surgery or an injury or something, and people do get better and they do get off. They do get out of long-term care. They do get off hospice. It happens. It's not uncommon.
Which is why, under Medicaid, they don't make you get rid of your house. Your house can still qualify. You can still keep your house even though you're in a facility. Because there is this chance that you're going to come back and they don't want you out on the street after you've paid for your house and all of that.
Right. And then where'd you go?
Mm-hmm.
So what haven't we covered that's a good thing to keep in mind when we're planning, or that, even if we're in the reactionary stage, something that we should know?
Yeah. Ask a lot of questions. Be curious, pretend like you're that kindergarten child and say, why, and just really understand. A good attorney, a good care provider, a good service offer, somebody who's offering services to you, anybody that's good is going to want to make sure that you understand the decision that you're making. And you shouldn't feel rushed into making any decisions. You should feel educated and then make an educated decision. Now, clearly, when you get into more of a crisis period, your analysis, your education is going to have to be truncated while you, get this done quickly. But that's the number one thing I think that you should know. And that's why we offer, and many attorneys do this, you've probably seen them around town, we offer the free seminars and the free strategy sessions. It's an opportunity for you to get familiar with what's out there, what the options are, so you can form your questions properly to make sure that you're getting them answered.
I think a lot of people hesitate to go to attorneys because it is an expense. It can be very costly. But to the extent that there are free strategy sessions, free phone calls that you take, and free seminars, it's worth looking into, because what's the old saying? An ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. I mean, some of these things can run up significant costs, and a few hundred or even a couple $1,000s might pay off just as insurance would in the long run by getting the state done right.
I've got a really sad story that goes right along with that, Justin. A situation where an attorney is just trying to sell a will or just trying to sell a trust. And we had a situation where an attorney sold a client a trust, but never funded the trust. So they paid $3,000, they got the trust, but because they never funded it, which is, something we talk about in our seminars, but because it was never funded, when they passed away, when the trustor, the people who created the trust, passed away, the trust was deemed invalid. And in this particular case, the trust clearly stated that all 5 children, 3 from one marriage, 2 from another marriage, got equal share. But without the trust, only the 3 of the most recent marriage got assets out of the trust or out of the estate. There was no trust. Got assets out of the estate. And the other 2 that had been part of the family, and it was a loving family, the other 2 got nothing because the attorney was just trying to sell a document.
Wow.
And so it's really important to just really know what you're doing. Go with somebody who knows what they're doing, that doesn't just care about getting a document done for you, but creating a plan for you moving forward.
Jake, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Yeah, we're really easy to get a hold of. lifeplanlegal.com, lifeplanlegalaz.com. All of our information's there. We have our phone number. You can call us. We actually have a calendar right on the website where they can schedule a 15-minute consultation or schedule a strategy session with us. Or, as I mentioned, we do a couple of seminars every month. So depending on when you listen to this, those are all listed on the website as well. And we'd love to have you out. They're all free, no obligations there. Just come and learn, ask questions, and be a part of this successful aging movement that we're trying to create.
Jake, thank you for all the valuable information. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate everything that you've done for us here today.
Well, thank you, Justin, for having me on, but also for what you're doing and what your assisted living home is doing and the impact that it's having on the community. And it's just a great place for people to look into if they have those needs.
Awesome. Good plug there.